Daniel Reyes stood at attention in a small white room on a space station far from Earth. He was a soldier, but today he was not here to fight. He was here to get married. The war between Earth and the Veshan Empire had lasted 3 years. Many people died on both sides. Finally, the leaders of both worlds agreed to stop fighting. They made a peace treaty, but treaties are not always strong. The Veshan leaders wanted something more. They wanted a marriage between their people and the humans to show that peace was real. Daniel did not choose this job. The army chose him. He was a quiet man, calm and serious. He never spoke much, even with his closest friends. But the generals knew something about him that most people did not know. Daniel was one of the best soldiers Earth had ever trained. He fought in the worst battles of the war and survived when many others did not. He never boasted about it. He just did his duty and went home. Now his duty was strange. He had to marry an alien princess named Kelthira, daughter of the Veshan Emperor. The Veshan people were tall, with gray skin and sharp eyes. They looked down on humans. To them, humans were small, weak, and primitive. The Veshan had ships that could cross stars in days. They had weapons far ahead of anything Earth built. They believed they were the strongest people in the galaxy, and humans were lucky to even be allowed to live in peace with them. Princess Kelthira hated this marriage from the moment she heard about it. She was young, proud, and powerful in her father's court. She had hoped to marry someone from a noble Veshan family, someone who could help her gain more power one day. Instead, her father told her she must marry a human soldier to save the peace treaty. "A human," she said to her father, disgust clear in her voice. "You want me to marry a creature that still uses guns and knives like an animal?" Her father, the emperor, did not care about her feelings. "The treaty must hold," he said. "Our people are tired of war. If this marriage keeps the peace, you will do it." So the wedding happened, quiet and formal, watched by cameras from both worlds. Kelthira stood beside Daniel in a long silver dress, her face cold and emotionless. Daniel wore his dress uniform, simple and clean, no medals shown, though he had earned many. After the wedding, Daniel moved into the royal palace on the Veshan home world. It was a strange place for him. The halls were tall and made of shining black stone. Every servant who looked at him seemed surprised, as if they expected him to be smaller, weaker, less human-looking than he was. Kelthira ignored him completely on the first night. She walked past him without a word and went straight to her own private rooms. Daniel did not complain. He simply nodded and found his own room in the large palace. He had faced harder things than a cold wife. He could wait. In the days that followed, Daniel kept to himself. He walked through the palace gardens in the early morning, watching the strange plants and listening to the sounds of an alien world. He spoke little, observed much. He paid attention to how the guards moved, how the nobles spoke to each other, who held real power and who only pretended to have it. The Veshan court was full of politics. Many noble families did not like the peace treaty. They believed Earth should have been destroyed in the war, not made into an ally. These nobles whispered against the marriage and against the emperor's choice to end the fighting. Daniel noticed this quickly. He said nothing about it, not yet. He simply watched and listened, learning the language faster than anyone expected. One evening, Kelthira found him in the library, reading old Veshan history books with the help of a translation device. "Why do you bother?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You will never understand our ways. Humans only understand fighting and dying." Daniel looked up calmly. "I want to understand my new home," he said simply. "That seems wise to me." Kelthira frowned. She expected him to be angry or maybe to beg for her approval. Instead, he looked steady, almost peaceful. It annoyed her more than any argument could have. "You are nothing here," she said. "You are only useful because of the treaty. Without it, you would be worthless to my people." "Maybe," Daniel said, not looking away from his book. "But I am still here, and I still have work to do." She left the library angry, though she could not explain exactly why his calm words bothered her so much. She had expected fear or anger or sadness. Instead, she only saw quiet patience, like a man who had already survived worse storms than her words. Weeks passed. Daniel kept learning. He studied the layout of the palace, the names of important officials, the history of conflicts between noble houses. He trained alone in the early mornings in a private courtyard, using exercises that looked strange to the Veshan guards who sometimes watched from a distance. They saw him move quickly, strike with control, and stop before any real damage was done. They did not understand what they were seeing. They only knew it did not look like the clumsy fighting they expected from humans. General Voranth, an older Veshan officer responsible for palace security, began to take notice. He was a serious man, devoted to duty, and he did not share the casual hatred many nobles felt toward humans. He had fought in the war himself and respected skilled soldiers, no matter where they came from. "You move like a soldier," Voranth said one morning, watching Daniel finish his training. "I was a soldier," Daniel replied, "for a long time." Voranth studied him carefully. "Many people in this palace believe you are weak, a formality, a symbol with no substance." "Let them believe what they want," Daniel said. "Beliefs change when truth shows itself." Voranth said nothing more that day, but he remembered those words. Kelthira, despite her anger, found herself watching Daniel more closely too. She noticed how the guards who once mocked him quietly began treating him with caution. She noticed how he never lost his temper, even when nobles insulted him openly at dinner. She told herself she did not care, but she still watched. One night, at a formal dinner with visiting nobles from a rival house, an Veshan lord named Threnes made a cruel joke about humans being only good for cleaning, not fighting. The table laughed. Kelthira expected Daniel to look hurt or embarrassed, as he had always seemed quiet around such insults. Instead, Daniel only smiled slightly. "Cleaning is useful work," he said calmly. "So is patience. I have plenty of both." The table went quiet. Threnes' smile faded, unsure if he had been insulted in return. Kelthira hid her own surprise, looking down at her plate, strangely impressed despite herself. She did not know it yet, but the political world around her was changing. Threnes and his noble house were part of a growing group who wanted the peace treaty broken, who saw this marriage as a weakness to be used, not respected. They watched Daniel carefully too, trying to decide if the quiet human was truly harmless, or if he was something else entirely. That night, alone in her room, Kelthira found herself thinking about her strange husband longer than she wanted to admit. She still believed humans were beneath her people, but a small doubt had begun to grow in her mind, small and quiet, like a single crack in old stone. She did not yet know how wrong her assumptions were. She did not yet know what Daniel Reyes truly was. But soon, she would find out, in a moment no one in the palace would forget. The palace held a grand ceremony 1 month after the wedding. It was called the Ascension Day, a yearly event where the emperor renewed his bond with the noble houses of the empire. Many important leaders from across Veshan space came to attend, including some who still doubted the wisdom of peace with Earth. Kelthira had to attend as the emperor's daughter, and by custom, her new husband had to walk beside her. She was not happy about this. She still saw Daniel as an embarrassment, a quiet shadow she had to drag along to important events. Before the ceremony began, she pulled him aside in a private hallway. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice cold. "Today is important. Many powerful people will be watching us. Do not embarrass me. Do not speak unless someone speaks to you first. Stand quietly, nod when needed, and try not to look as foolish as you usually do." Daniel listened without complaint. "Understood," he said simply. She studied his calm face, looking for any sign of anger or hurt feelings. She found none. It frustrated her even more than if he had argued. The ceremony took place in a massive hall with high ceilings and rows of seats filled with nobles from many planets. The emperor sat on a raised platform, speaking about unity and strength. Kelthira sat beside her father, with Daniel standing quietly behind her chair, as custom required for a royal spouse. Everything seemed calm and formal, until the moment everything changed. A servant walked toward the royal platform, carrying a tray of ceremonial drinks, as was traditional during the speech. No one paid much attention to him. He looked like any other palace worker. But Daniel noticed something wrong immediately. The servant's hands were shaking slightly. His eyes moved too quickly, scanning the room instead of focusing on his task. His uniform, though correct, was slightly too loose, as if borrowed in a hurry. Daniel's instincts, sharpened by years of war, recognized danger before his mind even finished the thought. As the servant approached the emperor's platform, Daniel moved. He stepped forward calmly, almost casually, placing himself between the servant and Kelthira's chair. In one smooth motion, he knocked the tray from the servant's hands. A small device hidden beneath the cups fell to the floor, blinking with a red light. "Bomb!" Daniel shouted, pulling Kelthira out of her chair and shielding her body with his own as he pushed her toward the floor, away from the platform. Guards reacted instantly, but slower than Daniel had already moved. The device exploded with a sharp burst of light and smoke, but Daniel had already redirected its position away from the royal platform, knocking it toward an open space near a stone pillar. The explosion cracked the pillar and shook the hall, but no one near the platform was hurt. Screams echoed through the chamber. Guards rushed to secure the area, grabbing the shocked servant, who turned out to be carrying false identification. Smoke filled part of the hall, but the emperor was safe. Kelthira was safe. She lay on the floor for a moment, Daniel's arm still protectively over her, his body between her and the blast area. Her heart pounded, not just from fear but from confusion. The reaction had happened so fast. One moment she was sitting calmly. The next she was on the ground, alive only because of her husband's quick action. "Are you hurt?" Daniel asked, his voice steady, checking her quickly for injuries. "I know," she said, still stunned. "How did you know?" "Training," he said simply, helping her to her feet. "I've seen people prepare to hurt others before. You learn to notice the small signs." Guards swarmed the area, securing the would-be assassin, who was later found to be hired by an unknown group, his real identity hidden behind forged documents. The ceremony ended in chaos, but the emperor and his daughter were unharmed, thanks to one human's quick reflexes. That night the palace buzzed with whispers. The guards who witnessed Daniel's reaction spoke quietly among themselves, describing how fast he moved, how calm he stayed, how precisely he handled the danger without panic. Some still doubted what they saw. Others began to wonder if the quiet human they had mocked for weeks was far more dangerous than anyone realized. General Vorinth personally reviewed the security footage of the event. He watched Daniel's movements again and again, studying the controlled speed, the precise calculation in every motion. This was not luck, Vorinth said to himself quietly. This was skill, real skill. He requested a private meeting with Daniel the next day. "You saved the emperor's life," Vorinth said directly, "and the princess's life. I want to know who taught you to react that way." "The army," Daniel said simply. "Years of training, years of war." "What kind of war?" Vorinth asked. Daniel paused before answering. "The kind that teaches you not to waste time being afraid. Fear gets people killed. Calm thinking saves them." Vorinth studied him carefully, his suspicion of humans slowly being replaced by quiet respect. "You hide your skill well," he said. "Why?" "Because showing strength without reason only creates fear and enemies," Daniel answered. "I would rather earn trust first." Vorinth nodded slowly. He said nothing more, but from that day, he began watching Daniel not as a curiosity, but as a serious soldier worth respecting. Kelthira, for her part, struggled with her own thoughts after the attack. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, the quick decision, the protective arm, the calm voice asking if she was hurt. No one had ever protected her so completely, not even her own personal guards, who had reacted too slowly to matter. She found Daniel later that evening in the palace gardens, sitting quietly near a small fountain. "You could have simply pushed me aside and saved yourself," she said, standing a short distance away. "Instead, you protected me first." Daniel looked at her calmly. "You are my wife," he said simply. "Whatever I think of this marriage, that means something to me." She frowned, unsure how to respond to such a simple answer. She was used to political games, hidden motives, careful words designed to manipulate. Daniel's honesty confused her more than any clever lie could have. "My people still believe humans are weak," she said, almost to herself. "Today you proved otherwise to some of them, but not to me, not yet." "That's fair," Daniel said. "Trust should be earned, not given freely. I don't expect you to believe in me overnight." She studied his calm face for a long moment. Despite herself, she felt a small shift inside her, like a tiny crack growing wider in a wall she had built carefully around her heart. "Rest well, Daniel Reyes," she said quietly, turning to leave. It was the first time she had used his full name without contempt in her voice. Daniel watched her leave, saying nothing, his face calm as always. But inside, he allowed himself a small, quiet feeling of progress, like a soldier who had won a small battle in a much longer war. Meanwhile, in a hidden meeting room far from the palace, a group of nobles gathered in secret. They were furious that the assassination attempt had failed. Lord Thrennes, the same noble who had mocked Daniel at dinner weeks earlier, sat at the head of the table, his face tight with anger. "The human ruined our plan," Thrennes said coldly. "He should not have noticed anything. He should not have moved that fast." "Who is this man really?" another noble asked. "Our information said he was simply a soldier with no special distinction." "Then our information was wrong," Thrennes said. "We need to learn more about him before we act again. If he is more dangerous than we believed, our next plan must be far more careful." The group fell into tense silence, already planning their next move, unaware that their failure had only strengthened the bond between the princess and her husband, a bond they desperately wanted to destroy. Back in the palace, Daniel returned to his room that night, his thoughts calm but alert. He knew the attack had not been random. Someone wanted chaos, wanted the treaty broken, wanted blood spilled to undo years of fragile peace. He intended to find out who, and to make sure they failed every single time they tried again. For the first time since arriving on this strange, cold world, Daniel felt a clear sense of purpose beyond simply enduring his duty. He had a wife who was slowly beginning to question her assumptions, a growing respect from at least one powerful Veshan officer, and a hidden enemy who had already shown their hand once. He intended to be ready the next time they tried. 3 weeks passed after the failed assassination at the Ascension Day ceremony. The palace returned to its normal rhythm, though an undercurrent of tension remained. Guards patrolled more carefully, nobles whispered more quietly, and somewhere in the shadows, Lord Thrennes and his allies continued planning. Daniel used this time wisely. He kept training in the early mornings, kept studying the palace and its politics, and slowly began to build a strange, careful friendship with General Vorinth. The old officer respected discipline above all else, and Daniel's quiet dedication impressed him more each day. "You train every morning, rain or clear sky," Vorinth said one day, watching Daniel finish a set of controlled movements in the courtyard. "Even though no one requires it of you." "Skills fade without practice," Daniel replied. "I'd rather stay ready than be caught unprepared." "Ready for what exactly?" Vorinth asked. Daniel paused, considering his answer carefully. "Whatever comes next, something tells me peace will be tested again soon." Vorinth said nothing, but his instincts agreed. Kelthira, too, had changed in small ways since the attack. She no longer ignored Daniel completely. She still kept her distance, still spoke to him with careful formality, but she watched him more closely now, studying him the way she might study an opponent whose strength she could not yet measure. One afternoon, she joined him in the garden without explanation, sitting nearby as he read. "The nobles still whisper about you," she said. "Some say you are simply lucky, others say you are hiding something dangerous." "What do you think?" Daniel asked, looking up from his book. She considered the question seriously. I am no longer certain what you are," she admitted, "and that troubles me more than if I knew you were simply weak." Daniel almost smiled. "Uncertainty is not always a bad thing," he said. Sometimes it means you're finally seeing clearly." She did not answer, but she did not leave either. They sat together in silence for a while, an unfamiliar peace settling between them. That peace did not last long. Lord Thrennes, growing desperate after his failed assassination attempt, decided on a bolder plan. If he could not kill Daniel through secrecy, he would destroy him through open violence, framing the attack as a Veshan military failure to embarrass the Emperor and damage the treaty from within. He hired a group of skilled mercenaries, dangerous fighters from a lawless border world, paying them heavily to ambush Daniel during one of his early morning training walks through the palace's outer gardens, a quiet path with fewer guards than the main halls. The mercenaries studied Daniel's routine for days, learning his habits, choosing the perfect moment to strike. On a cold, quiet morning, as fog drifted low over the garden paths, 6 armed mercenaries moved into position, surrounding the path Daniel always used. They carried advanced energy weapons, faster and more powerful than anything Earth's military had during the war. They believed surprise alone would be enough to kill one unarmed human soldier. They were wrong. Daniel noticed the ambush before it even began. The fog was too still in certain areas, as if bodies were hiding just beyond sight. Birds that usually sang in the garden trees had gone silent. Years of war had taught him to trust these small signs without hesitation. As the first mercenary stepped out, weapon raised, Daniel was already moving. He closed the distance instantly, faster than the mercenary expected, knocking the weapon aside before it could fire and striking precisely, dropping the attacker in a single controlled motion. He did not pause to admire the result. He moved immediately to the next position, predicting the second attacker's approach from the sound of careful footsteps on wet grass. The second mercenary fired, but Daniel had already shifted aside, using a low stone wall for partial cover. He returned with a quick strike to the attacker's weapon arm, disabling the shot before disabling the shooter with controlled force, never lethal unless necessary, never excessive. 3 more mercenaries closed in from different directions, working together, clearly trained fighters used to coordinated attacks. Daniel adjusted instantly, using the garden's tight spaces to limit how many could reach him at once. He moved like water, finding the easiest path, striking quickly, disarming weapons, redirecting attacks back toward the attacker's own balance and momentum. It was not brute strength that made Daniel dangerous. It was precision, calculation, years of hard-earned instinct refined through real combat, the kind of skill that could not be faked or rushed. The last mercenary, the team's leader, finally understood they had underestimated their target completely. He activated a hidden alarm device, signaling for emergency extraction, but Daniel reached him before he could escape, disarming him with controlled efficiency and pinning him firmly to the ground. "Who sent you?" Daniel asked calmly, his voice steady despite the intensity of the fight moments earlier. The mercenary said nothing, fear and disbelief clear on his face. Palace guards finally arrived, alerted by the noise, only to find 5 mercenaries unconscious or restrained, and the 6th pinned helplessly beneath Daniel's controlled grip. Daniel stood calmly, his uniform slightly torn but his body otherwise unharmed, having taken minimal damage throughout the entire encounter. Word of the attack spread through the palace within hours. Vorinth arrived personally to oversee the prisoner's interrogation, his respect for Daniel deepening into something close to awe. 6 trained fighters, Vorinth said, reviewing the scene, armed with advanced weapons, and you defeated them with almost no injury. They were skilled, Daniel said simply, but predictable. Coordinated attackers often rely too much on their plan, not enough on adapting when it fails. Vorinth studied him carefully. Where does a simple soldier learn skills like this? Daniel hesitated only slightly before answering honestly. I wasn't a simple soldier. I served in Earth's deepest conflicts, the wars fought when our own world nearly tore itself apart before we even reached the stars. I've fought enemies far more desperate and dangerous than ordinary armies. The Vestian Empire only saw the calm soldiers sent to maintain a treaty. They never saw what experience really shaped me. Vorinth absorbed this information slowly, finally understanding the full scope of what Daniel truly was. Not a symbolic gesture of peace, but a deeply skilled warrior, deliberately presenting himself as harmless to avoid unnecessary conflict. News of the attack reached Kelthira quickly. She rushed to the garden, fear gripping her chest in a way she did not expect to feel for a man she had married only out of duty. When she arrived, she found Daniel standing calmly amid defeated attackers, completely unharmed, his expression as composed as ever. She stared at the scene in stunned silence. 6 trained fighters, defeated almost effortlessly by the man she had openly mocked for weeks, the man she had called weak and primitive in front of the entire court. You did this alone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They underestimated me," Daniel said simply. "Most people do at first." Kelthira looked at him with an expression he had not seen from her before, somewhere between disbelief and something close to genuine respect. "I called you weak," she said quietly. "I called you primitive." "You believed what you were taught to believe," Daniel said without bitterness. "I never expected otherwise." She shook her head slowly, her earlier confidence shattered completely. "I do not know what to believe anymore." "That's a good place to start," Daniel said gently. "Understanding often begins with admitting what you don't yet know." She studied him for a long moment, the cold mask she always wore slipping slightly, revealing something more uncertain and human underneath. Word of the failed ambush spread quickly through every level of Vestian society, reaching even the emperor himself, who demanded a full investigation into who had dared attack his daughter's husband within the palace grounds. Lord Threnes, watching the failure unfold from a safe distance, realized his mistake too late. He had revealed his hand without achieving his goal, and now suspicion would inevitably begin pointing toward his noble house. "We must be more careful," he told his allies that night, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The human is far more dangerous than we believed. If brute force will not work, we must use something far more clever." As the conspirators began planning their next move, deeper within the palace, something had already changed permanently. Kelthira no longer saw Daniel as a burden forced upon her by politics. She saw him now as something far more complicated, a man whose true strength remained mostly hidden, who fought not for glory, but out of quiet, steady duty. And for the first time since her wedding day, she found herself wondering if perhaps she had misjudged not just her husband, but the entire species she had been raised to look down upon. The failed ambush in the garden could not be hidden from the Imperial Council. Word spread too quickly, and too many guards had seen the defeated mercenaries with their advanced weapons lying useless on the ground. The Emperor demanded answers. How had armed attackers entered the palace grounds undetected? Who had sent them? And most pressing of all, who exactly was this human soldier who had defeated 6 trained fighters without serious injury? A formal council was called, the first time Daniel had been summoned to stand before the full gathering of Vestian elders since his wedding day. The grand chamber was filled with powerful nobles, military leaders, and advisors from every major house in the empire. Many had heard rumors about the human's skill. Few believed them fully until they saw him stand calmly before the council, unshaken by the weight of so many suspicious eyes upon him. The emperor sat at the head of the chamber, Kelthira beside him, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes followed Daniel closely. "Tell us plainly," the emperor said. "What happened in the garden, and what are you that you could defeat 6 armed soldiers alone?" Daniel answered honestly, without exaggeration or false humility. "I was trained for many years in conflicts on Earth, long before humans reached the stars. The skills I used were not unusual for soldiers of my background. I simply did what was necessary to protect myself, and to protect this palace from further harm." A noble near the front, skeptical and clearly aligned with houses opposed to the treaty, spoke up sharply. "If humans possess such skill, why hide it? Why present yourselves as weak during the war negotiations?" Because strength without purpose creates fear, Daniel replied calmly. And fear often leads to more conflict, not less. My people wanted peace, not a new arms race built on intimidation. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some nobles nodded slowly, recognizing wisdom in his words. Others remained openly suspicious, unwilling to trust a species they had fought so recently. General Vorinth, standing near the council's military section, stepped forward to speak. I have personally reviewed the evidence, he said firmly. The attackers were skilled mercenaries, hired through hidden channels, using weapons far more advanced than common criminals could afford. This was not a simple robbery or random violence. This was a planned assassination attempt, likely connected to whoever attempted to harm the emperor during the Ascension Day ceremony. The chamber fell into tense silence. Such an accusation meant a noble house, perhaps one represented within the very chamber, was responsible for attacks against both the emperor and his daughter's husband. Lord Thrennes, seated among the gathered nobles, kept his expression carefully controlled, though inwardly his anger and fear both grew. He had not expected Vorinth, a respected and serious officer, to connect the two attacks so directly. The emperor's gaze swept slowly across the chamber. Whoever is responsible, he said, his voice cold and steady, will be found and will answer for their treason against this empire and its peace. The council session ended without immediate accusations, but the message was clear. The investigation into both attacks would continue, and no noble house was above suspicion. After the council dispersed, Kelthira approached Daniel privately in one of the palace's quiet side chambers. You handled their questions well, she said. Calm, honest, without unnecessary pride. There was no need for pride, Daniel said simply, only the truth. She studied him carefully. Many nobles still distrust you. Some fear you now more than they ever feared humanity during the war. Fear fades when trust grows, Daniel said. It will take time, but I'm willing to be patient. Kelthira hesitated before her next words, as if unsure whether to admit them. I find myself defending you now when others speak against you. I did not expect that of myself. Daniel looked at her with quiet warmth, though his expression remained calm as always. People often surprise themselves when their assumptions are tested by reality. She looked away, uncertain how to respond to the strange, steady comfort his words gave her. Meanwhile, General Vorinth began a deeper investigation into the noble houses most likely connected to both attacks. He worked quietly, carefully, gathering evidence without revealing his suspicions too early. He discovered hidden financial transactions linking Thrennes' household to a known group of mercenaries operating along the Empire's lawless border regions, the very same group responsible for the garden ambush. Vorinth brought this evidence privately to Daniel before presenting it formally to the Emperor. I believe Lord Thrennes is responsible, Vorinth said quietly, showing Daniel the documents he had gathered. But accusing a powerful noble house without absolute proof could create chaos within the court, especially if his allies decide to defend him through force rather than law. Daniel studied the evidence carefully. Then we need proof strong enough that even his allies cannot deny it, he said. Rushing this could give him time to escape or destroy evidence. We move carefully and we move together. Vorinth nodded, his respect for Daniel deepening even further. You think like a soldier but plan like a strategist. War taught me both skills, Daniel said. Sometimes patience wins battles that force alone cannot. Over the following days, Daniel and Vorinth worked together quietly, gathering additional evidence while avoiding any suspicion from Thrennes' allies. Daniel used his growing knowledge of palace politics to identify which nobles might be persuaded to support the emperor if Thrennes' treason became undeniable, while Vorinth secured testimony from lower-ranking guards who had noticed unusual activity within Thrennes' household. Kelthira, increasingly curious about her husband's quiet efforts, began assisting as well, using her own connections within noble society to learn which houses remained loyal to her father and which secretly supported breaking the treaty. You move carefully, she told Daniel one evening, after sharing information about a noble family secretly meeting with Threnes' representatives. Like you're fighting a war without anyone noticing the battle is happening. In some ways, that's exactly what this is, Daniel said. Political wars are fought with patience and information, not weapons. She studied him closely. You speak of war so naturally. I've lived through enough of it, Daniel admitted. I'd rather end this quietly than let it grow into something violent that hurts innocent people. She nodded slowly, understanding now why he always seemed so controlled, so deliberate in every action. He was not simply hiding strength out of humility. He was protecting peace through careful restraint, choosing patience over violence whenever possible. As the investigation deepened, Threnes grew increasingly desperate, sensing the net slowly closing around him. He realized that simple ambushes and hired mercenaries had failed completely against Daniel's skill and Vorinth's careful investigation. If he wished to break the treaty and seize greater power, he needed a far bolder, more decisive plan, one that would not rely on hidden assassins or quiet manipulation. He began gathering his most loyal allies in secret, discussing a plan far more dangerous than anything attempted before. A direct strike against the Emperor himself, framed carefully to appear as a foreign attack, giving Threnes the chance to seize emergency control of the Empire under the excuse of protecting it from outside threats. If subtlety has failed, Threnes told his allies coldly, then we act with full force. The Emperor's weakness has allowed humans and their primitive ways to threaten our Empire's strength. It is time to remind everyone who truly holds power within these halls. His allies, desperate and fully committed now, agreed without hesitation, beginning preparations for a coup that would shake the Empire's foundations. Unaware of the full scope of Threnes' plan, but sensing rising danger from the increased secrecy among his allies, Vorinth warned Daniel directly. Whoever is behind this will not stop quietly. If they feel cornered, they may act with far greater violence than before. Daniel nodded, his expression calm but serious. Then we need to be ready before they make their move, not after. That night, as Daniel walked the quiet halls of the palace, deep in thought about the coming danger, Kelthira found him once more, her expression uncharacteristically open and worried. Whatever happens next, she said quietly, promise me you'll be careful. Daniel looked at her, surprised by the genuine concern in her voice, so different from the cold contempt she once showed him. I promise to do everything necessary to protect this palace and everyone in it, he said, including you. She nodded, something unspoken passing silently between them, a fragile trust slowly growing stronger despite the looming danger ahead. Neither of them knew exactly when Threnes would strike, but both understood clearly that the Empire's true test was coming soon, a test that would reveal not just the strength of one hidden human warrior, but the true nature of the fragile alliance between two very different worlds. The strike came faster than anyone expected. 3 days after Vorinth's warning, Lord Threnes put his plan into motion. He had gathered enough loyal soldiers from his own house guard, along with several allied noble families who shared his hatred of the human treaty, to attempt something no one in the palace had seen in generations, an armed coup against the Emperor himself. It began at night, during a quiet hour when palace security was at its lowest point. Threnes' soldiers, dressed in stolen uniforms to disguise their identity, moved through hidden service corridors toward the Emperor's private wing. Their plan was simple but brutal: kill the Emperor. Frame the attack as a hidden human plot using forged evidence already planted in advance, and seize emergency control of the Empire under the excuse of protecting it from a dangerous foreign threat. Daniel was awake when the first alarm sounded, his instincts already alert from days of growing tension. He moved quickly through the palace halls, finding Vorinth already gathering loyal guards near the central command room. Threnes has made his move, Vorinth said grimly. His soldiers are heading for the Emperor's wing. We don't have much time. Then we don't waste it talking, Daniel said. They moved together, gathering as many trustworthy guards as possible, but Threnes had planned carefully, cutting off several key paths with his own soldiers to slow any defense. Daniel realized quickly that a direct, frontal response would take too long. The Emperor's wing was too far, and too many corridors had already been blocked. Kelthira found them moments later, having woken to the sound of distant alarms. Her face was pale but determined, all traces of her old coldness toward Daniel completely gone. "There's a hidden passage," she said quickly, "built for emergencies, known only to the royal family and a few trusted guards. It leads directly to my father's chambers." "Show us," Daniel said immediately. She led them through a narrow servants' corridor, down a hidden staircase behind an old tapestry, moving quickly through passages built centuries ago for exactly this kind of crisis. Daniel matched her pace easily, Vorinth and a handful of loyal soldiers following close behind. They emerged just outside the Emperor's private chambers, arriving just as Threnes' lead soldiers reached the same door from the main corridor. A tense standoff formed instantly, soldiers on both sides raising weapons, the air thick with sudden danger. Threnes himself appeared moments later, his expression cold and confident, clearly believing his plan was already secured. "Step aside," he said calmly to Daniel and Vorinth. "This matter does not concern outsiders or human spouses. This is purely a Veshan affair." "Treason concerns everyone loyal to the Empire," Vorinth said sharply. "Stand down, Threnes. Your plan has already failed." "Has it?" Threnes said, a cruel smile forming. "I have enough soldiers here to take this wing before reinforcements arrive. Your human husband's tricks will not save you this time, Princess." Daniel stepped forward calmly, his voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. "You've underestimated humans twice already. I'd think carefully before trying a third time." Threnes laughed coldly. Arrogant words from a creature that will not survive the next few minutes. He gave the signal, and his soldiers attacked. The corridor erupted into chaos, energy weapons firing in tight, enclosed space. Daniel moved instantly, pulling Kelthira behind a stone support pillar before turning to engage the nearest attackers. Vorinth and his loyal soldiers fought fiercely beside him, but Threnes' forces outnumbered them significantly, having planned their numbers carefully in advance. Daniel fought with controlled precision, disarming soldiers quickly, using the tight corridor to limit how many attackers could reach him simultaneously. Years of hard combat experience guided every motion, every calculated strike meant to disable rather than kill whenever possible, though the danger remained very real. Kelthira, refusing to simply hide and wait, surprised everyone by joining the fight herself. She had trained in basic self-defense as part of her royal education, skills she had never needed seriously until now. She moved cleverly, using her knowledge of the palace's hidden mechanisms to trigger a section of the corridor's old defensive systems, sealing off one pathway and trapping several of Threnes' soldiers away from the main fight. "I didn't know you could do that," Daniel said, briefly impressed, even as he disarmed another attacker beside him. "There is much you don't know about me yet," she replied, a flash of fierce determination in her eyes that Daniel had never seen before. Together, they fought back the remaining soldiers, Daniel's combat skill combined with Kelthira's clever use of the palace's hidden defenses turning the tide of the battle. Vorinth's loyal soldiers held their ground, slowly pushing back Threnes' forces despite the difficult odds. Threnes, seeing his plan falling apart, grew desperate. He pulled a hidden weapon, more powerful than the others, aiming directly at Kelthira in a final, reckless attempt to secure some kind of victory through fear and chaos. Daniel reacted instantly, moving between them just as Threnes fired. The shot grazed Daniel's shoulder, sharp pain flashing through his arm, but he did not stop. He closed the distance to Threnes in seconds, disarming him with controlled force before pinning him firmly against the corridor wall. "It's over," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the pain in his shoulder. "Your soldiers are defeated. Your plan has failed completely." Threnny struggled weakly, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "You should have died weeks ago," he hissed. "You keep saying that," Daniel replied calmly, "and yet here we are." Palace guards, finally alerted by the chaos, arrived in greater numbers, quickly securing the remaining soldiers and placing Thrennies under arrest. The emperor, safe within his chambers the entire time, emerged once the fighting ended, finding his daughter and her human husband standing together amid the aftermath of the failed coup, both exhausted but very much alive. The emperor looked at the scene before him with a mixture of shock and deep gratitude. "You saved my life," he said to Daniel, his voice quieter than usual, "and my daughter's life as well." "We saved each other," Daniel said, glancing briefly at Kelthira. "This wasn't something I could have stopped alone." Kelthira stepped forward, her expression firm and proud despite her exhaustion. "Father, Lord Thrennies planned this attack from the very beginning. He was also behind the earlier attempts on my life and on Daniel's. General Vorinth has evidence proving it clearly." The emperor's expression hardened as he looked toward the restrained Thrennies. "Treason against the throne, attempted murder of the emperor and the royal family. You will answer for this fully, before the entire council." Thrennies said nothing further, defeated completely, his ambitions crushed by the very alliance he had tried so desperately to destroy. In the days that followed, the full truth came out before the Imperial Council. Thrennies and his allies were stripped of their titles and imprisoned, their conspiracy fully exposed through Vorinth's careful investigation and the evidence gathered during the failed coup. The remaining noble houses, shaken by how close the empire had come to chaos, began reconsidering their old prejudices against humanity. Daniel's shoulder healed quickly under medical care, though the scar remained, a quiet reminder of how close danger had come. Kelthira visited him often during his recovery, no longer out of obligation, but out of something far warmer and more genuine. "I misjudged you completely when we first married," she admitted one quiet evening, sitting beside his bed. "I believed humans were weak, simple, beneath the Veshan Empire's true strength." "And now?" Daniel asked, watching her carefully. "Now I understand that strength is not always loud or obvious," she said. "Sometimes it is patient, controlled, and far wiser than I ever expected." Daniel smiled slightly, one of the rare moments his calm expression softened completely. "I never needed you to see me as strong," he said. "I only hoped, eventually, you might see me as someone worth trusting." "I do," she said simply, her voice warm and certain. "Completely." In the months that followed, the Human-Veshan alliance grew stronger than ever before, no longer built only on careful treaties and political necessity, but on genuine respect earned through shared danger and mutual trust. Daniel's quiet heroism became known throughout the empire, not as a story of human aggression, but as proof that true strength often came from patience, discipline, and quiet sacrifice rather than open displays of power. Kelthira, once ashamed of her arranged marriage, now stood proudly beside her husband during official ceremonies, no longer hiding her respect and affection behind cold formality. The Veshan court, slowly but surely, began to see humanity not as a primitive species to be tolerated, but as a people whose calm strength deserved genuine respect. And within the quiet halls of the palace, far from the political struggles and dangerous conspiracies that had once threatened everything, Daniel Reyes and Princess Kelthira built something neither of them expected from a marriage born purely out of duty: a true partnership, grounded in mutual respect, shared courage, and a peace far stronger than any treaty alone could ever create.